My wife began cheating on me, and I decided to take revenge. First, I seduced her mother, then I filed a lawsuit and won all the assets, and finally, I posted a video of the affair online. This is the part where I lay it all out. No sugarcoating, no holding back. I found out my wife, Jessica, had been cheating on me with multiple men. It wasn't one of those gradual realizations where you piece things together over time. It hit me all at once, like a runaway freight train. At first, I couldn't even process how deep the betrayal went. You think you know someone, you build a life together, share every part of yourself, and then suddenly, it all falls apart. Let me take you back to the beginning. I met Jessica back in college. She was everything to me. Funny, smart, driven. She had that kind of smile that just pulls you in, and I was completely hooked. I remember the night we met. It was at one of those wild college parties where everyone's trying to drink away their stress. But she stood out. I thought she was it for me, the one I'd been looking for. We clicked immediately, and the conversations flowed like we'd known each other for years. We talked about everything. Our dreams, our futures, what we wanted out of life. It felt perfect. Fast forward a few years, and we got married. It was a simple ceremony, nothing fancy. Neither of us cared much for extravagant weddings. At least, that's what I thought. Life was good, for a while. But now, looking back, I realized there were signs. They always say hindsight is 20/20, right? It started with small things, late nights at work, more girls' nights out, and suddenly, she had all these new friends I'd never met before. The first few times, I didn't think much of it. She was ambitious, and her job as a project manager kept her busy. But then she started coming home drunk more often. That was weird because Jessica had never been a heavy drinker. Not before. When I asked her about it, she would brush it off. Work stress, she said, or just a long night out with the girls. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But when you're lying in bed, waiting for the person who used to be excited to come home, and now they're stumbling in at 2 or 3 in the morning, reeking of booze and something else you can't place, you start to question things. You start snooping, because what else can you do when your gut tells you something's wrong? But the person you love keeps telling you it's all in your head? I'd see her texting late at night, laughing at messages, and quickly hiding her phone when I walked into the room. She told me it was just her friends, but it didn't feel right. There was always that nagging feeling at the back of my mind, the kind that keeps you up at night, wondering what the hell is going on when the person you thought you knew is turning into a stranger. One night, she passed out after another so-called girls' night out. I couldn't take it anymore. I'm not proud of it, but I grabbed her phone. The thing is, she never let me touch her phone before. There was always some excuse, work stuff, confidential projects, but I'd figured out her passcode weeks ago. I just hadn't had the courage to check it until that night. I knew I was crossing a line, but I didn't care. I needed answers. I unlocked it, my hands shaking like crazy. At first, there were just harmless texts, a bunch of group messages with her friends, some work emails. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize, Tom. And after him, another name, Rob. My heart started pounding. I kept scrolling, and that's when I found the photos. And the videos. Jesus Christ, I'll never forget that feeling. My chest felt like it was collapsing as I scrolled through them. It wasn't just one guy. There were multiple. And these weren't just flirty texts or innocent selfies. These were full-on videos from some kind of party. A party I sure as hell wasn't invited to. Group sex parties. My wife was doing things with these men that I never even imagined she would be into. Every new image, every new video, felt like a fresh stab in the gut. By the time I put the phone down, I was shaking so badly I thought I might throw up. I looked over at her, passed out like nothing was wrong, while my entire world was disintegrating in front of me. I didn't wake her up. I couldn't. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell had happened to my life. How did we get here? Was it my fault? Had I pushed her into this? Or had she always been like this, and I just blinded myself because I wanted to believe in the fantasy we had built together? Once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. It changes everything. And the anger. It starts off slow, like this burn in your chest, but before long, it's consuming you. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to break everything in sight. But I didn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the fight that was coming. Instead, I spent the rest of that night trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I've heard people say revenge isn't worth it, that it won't make you feel any better in the end. Well, they're full of it. After discovering what Jessica had been doing behind my back, the only thing keeping me from going insane was the thought of getting back at her. And I knew it had to be personal. It wasn't enough to just leave her or expose her. No, I wanted her to feel that same pain, that gut-wrenching twist in your stomach when you realize everything you trusted was a lie. That's when the idea of Susan came to mind. Yeah, Jessica's mom, Susan. Let's just say she aged like fine wine. She was still married to Jessica's dad, but their marriage had been on the rocks for a while. Jessica had mentioned it in passing. Something about them not really being in love anymore, just going through the motions for the sake of appearances. Perfect. It started slow, subtle. I didn't want to rush anything. I knew I had to play the long game with this one. After all, Susan wasn't a fool. She had been through her share of life and seen her own battles. I couldn't afford to spook her. So, I began positioning myself as the supportive son-in-law. After all, I had to keep up appearances while planning my move. We'd meet for family dinners, just casual things. I'd offer to help her with little things around the house, or we'd grab coffee now and then, talking about how tough things were for both of us. Of course, I played the part of the heartbroken husband like a pro. I'd drop little hints about my troubles with Jessica, how I felt distant from her, how I didn't understand why our marriage was falling apart. Susan, being the nurturing type, ate it all up. She started opening up to me about her own issues with Jessica's dad, how she felt lonely and unappreciated. It was like clockwork. The more she opened up, the closer we got. Then came the perfect moment. One evening, I suggested we meet for dinner, just the two of us. Nothing unusual, right? After all, she had been my confidant for months, and I was so grateful for her support. We went to a nice, quiet restaurant. I could see she was flattered. I kept the conversation light at first, but as the wine flowed, things began to shift. She talked about her marriage problems, how she felt trapped, how she missed feeling desired. That was my in. I leaned in, and I'll never forget the look in her eyes when I barely brushed her hand. She didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned in a little too. It was all too easy. After another bottle of wine, I suggested we head back to her place. I kept my tone casual, like it was just another night, but inside, I was boiling with a mix of anger and excitement. This was it. When we got back to her place, things escalated quickly. A few more drinks, some lingering touches, and suddenly we were on the couch, kissing like teenagers. It wasn't some romantic, passionate thing. No, it was raw, fueled by years of frustration on her part and my need to get back at Jessica. In the back of my mind, I felt this twisted satisfaction. Every move, every touch, it was all part of the plan. I don't know if Susan even realized what she was getting into. Hell, maybe she did. Maybe she wanted it just as much. Either way, that night I got exactly what I wanted. We ended up in her bed, and I'll spare you the details, but let's just say revenge can feel pretty damn good when you're angry enough. The next morning, Susan acted like it was some big secret, like she was suddenly guilty about what we'd done. She kept saying how no one could ever know and how it shouldn't have happened. But I wasn't interested in her guilt. I didn't care about what she thought or how she felt. For me, it was just step one of the plan. A few days later, I decided it was time to drop the bomb on Jessica. I wasn't going to be subtle about it. No, I wanted her to feel the full weight of what had happened. So, I waited until we were sitting at the kitchen table, just a regular evening after work. She was on her phone, probably texting one of her many friends from those sick parties she went to. I had to fight back the urge to throw her phone across the room. Instead, I leaned back and said, as calmly as I could, "I slept with your mother." You know that moment when someone's world completely shatters? I saw it happen right there in front of me. Jessica froze, her eyes wide, like she couldn't process what I had just said. She stammered, trying to form words, but all that came out was, "What? That's not, you're lying." I smiled. "Oh, I'm not." We had dinner, a few drinks, and then, well, you know how these things go. I could see the anger starting to rise in her. She wanted to lash out, to scream, but she was too stunned to move. So I twisted the knife a little deeper. If you want details, I'm happy to share. She jumped up from the table, her face red with fury. You're disgusting, she screamed, her voice cracking. How could you do that? My mother? You're sick. I stood up too, leaning over the table. Am I? I spat back. What about you, Jessica? Huh. How many men have you slept with behind my back? You think I don't know? Group sex parties? Really? Who's the sick one here? The room was filled with this heavy silence, broken only by her labored breathing. I could see the realization setting in. She knew I was serious. She knew I wasn't bluffing. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. I didn't give her the chance to recover. Yeah, Jessica, I know everything. Every disgusting detail. And guess what? Your mother? She's better than you. That was it. She snapped. She threw her phone at me, screaming every insult she could think of, but I just stood there, calm as ever. She was losing control, and I had never felt more in control of the situation. This was the revenge I wanted. I wanted her to feel that same humiliation, that same betrayal. As she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, I felt satisfied. It was twisted, sure, but after everything she had done, it felt right. Once the dust settled after my little revelation about Susan, I knew what my next move had to be: divorce. It wasn't even a question. I couldn't stay married to someone like Jessica. Not after what I'd seen, and certainly not after what I'd done. Our marriage had been a sham for God knows how long, and now it was time to burn it all down. But I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. No, I had evidence. Solid, damning evidence. And I was going to use every bit of it to make sure she never forgot what she did to me. The first step was getting a lawyer. I wasn't playing around. I needed someone ruthless, someone who would go for the throat. And I found just the guy, a shark of a divorce attorney named Harris. He didn't ask a lot of questions, just wanted to see the evidence I had. So I handed him the videos, the photos, everything I'd gathered from her phone. I'll never forget the look on his face when he opened the files. It was like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Well, he said after a long pause, I think we've got more than enough to bury her. And that's exactly what we did. Filing for divorce wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be, but it was necessary. I wanted out of this mess, and I wanted to take as much with me as possible. So we started compiling everything, every video, every text, every receipt that showed Jessica was living this double life. I wasn't just out for revenge anymore. I was going for full destruction. I wanted her to be humiliated, to lose everything she thought she could hide behind. When the court proceedings started, it felt like stepping into a gladiator arena. Jessica showed up looking like she hadn't slept in days, probably because she knew what was coming. But I didn't care. She had done this to herself. She had the nerve to act all innocent, though, like she hadn't been caught red-handed, screwing multiple guys behind my back. She sat there with her lawyer, this sleazy guy who tried to paint her as the victim, saying she'd made mistakes and that our marriage had fallen apart over time. Yeah, no, those weren't mistakes. Those were choices. Choices she made over and over again. The tension in the courtroom was thick. Every time her lawyer tried to spin some sob story about how we'd grown apart, I watched the judge's face. He wasn't buying it. Not when we had the kind of evidence we did. When it was my turn to present the videos, I made sure they were played in full view of everyone in that room. I wanted them to see the real Jessica, not the innocent wife she was trying to play. And let me tell you, it was a show. Jessica sat there, pale as a ghost, as the videos played. The sounds, the images, there was no denying what she'd done. You could see the horror on her face as everyone watched. It was priceless. Her lawyer kept trying to object, saying it was too personal or irrelevant, but the judge didn't stop it. He let it all play out, minute by minute. By the time it was over, Jessica looked like she was going to be sick. She knew there was no way out of this. I testified, too, of course. I laid it all out, the late nights, the lies, the hidden phone, the group sex parties. I told the court how I found out, how I confronted her, how she had the audacity to deny it at first. And the whole time, Jessica just sat there, staring at the floor, unable to even look at me. The court battle lasted longer than I expected, with Jessica's lawyer trying every trick in the book to paint her as the victim. But the evidence was too strong. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I got the house, most of our assets, and a clean break from the woman who destroyed our marriage. It was a win, but it didn't feel as good as I thought it would. Maybe because deep down, I knew there was more I could do. That's when I decided to take it one step further. Just getting a court ruling wasn't enough. I wanted everyone to know who Jessica really was. I wanted her life to implode the way mine had. So after the ruling, I took those videos, the ones from her phone, and I uploaded them to an anonymous website. Don't ask me which one. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. It was one of those shady sites where people share all kinds of messed up stuff. And within hours, the videos were spreading like wildfire. I sat back and watched it all happen. I watched the views climb, the comments pour in, and I felt this strange sense of satisfaction wash over me. Jessica had no idea what was coming. She had no idea her dirty little secret was now out there for the world to see. And that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted her to feel the humiliation, the shame, the loss of control. It didn't take long for the news to spread. I heard whispers from mutual friends, saw posts online. People were talking. Jessica was becoming infamous, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her work found out, too. Turns out being a project manager and starring in group sex videos doesn't exactly mix well. I didn't have to do anything after that. Her life just unraveled on its own. People started distancing themselves from her. She lost her job, and eventually, even her new friends from those parties didn't want anything to do with her. And you know what? I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. She had it coming. All of it. That night, after watching the fallout unfold, I slept better than I had in months. There was something oddly peaceful about knowing she had finally gotten what she deserved. I didn't care if it made me a bad person. At that point, I'd stopped caring about a lot of things. All I cared about was making sure she paid for what she did. And she did in full. After everything that went down, the court battle, the videos, the fallout, I knew I had to get my life back together. You can only live in revenge mode for so long before it starts eating you alive. So I made a decision. It was time to rebuild, to focus on myself for once. No more thinking about Jessica or what she did. I wanted to move on, even if I wasn't entirely sure how to do it. The first thing I did was start exercising. I'd never been the gym rat type, but I needed something to burn off the anger, the frustration. Every morning, I'd hit the gym, running on that treadmill like I was trying to outrun my own thoughts. At first, it was just about getting through the day without feeling like I was going to explode. But slowly, it became something more. I started to enjoy it. I pushed myself harder, lifting weights, running further. And you know what? It helped. Physically, I felt better, stronger. I felt like I was in control of something again. And that was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. Then I started doing things I hadn't done in years. Visiting new places, picking up old hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage. I always loved photography, but somewhere along the way, I'd stopped taking pictures. Jessica wasn't into it, so it just kind of faded away. But now, I had all the time in the world. So I dusted off my old camera and started going on these weekend trips. Sometimes I'd just drive without a plan, stopping wherever looked interesting, snapping photos of landscapes, people, random moments. It was like rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten. But no matter how much I tried to fill my days with new things, the past still lingered. At night, when everything was quiet, my mind would drift back to Jessica. I'd replay the good times, the memories of when we were happy. It wasn't all bad, you know? We had moments, genuine moments, where I thought we had it all. And that's the hardest part. It's not like everything was terrible from the start. There was a time when I loved her, when I thought she was my forever. But all of that was overshadowed by what she did, by the lies and the betrayal. I'd lie awake, thinking about how things could have been different. What if I'd caught on sooner? What if I'd been a better husband? But those thoughts are poison. You can't change the past, no matter how many times you go over it in your head. It's like standing in front of a wrecked car, wondering what would have happened if you'd taken a different road. The crash still happened. You just have to deal with the aftermath. One day at work, I met Sophia. She was new to the office, fresh out of some marketing firm in another city. We started talking, at first just casual work stuff, but then we found common ground. She was into photography too, and we'd share stories about places we'd been, the kind of shots we like to take. There was something easy about talking to her, something that felt safe. But even though I was drawn to her, there was this wall inside me. I couldn't let her in. Not completely. I'd been burned too badly, and the idea of opening up to someone again scared the hell out of me. Every time I thought about letting my guard down, I'd hear that little voice in the back of my head, reminding me of what happened with Jessica, reminding me that trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it's damn near impossible to rebuild. Sophia was patient, though. She didn't push. We'd hang out after work sometimes, grabbing a drink or two, talking about everything and nothing. And slowly, I felt myself loosening up around her. I could be myself, without the weight of everything that happened dragging me down. She wasn't like Jessica. At least, I hoped she wasn't. But still, that fear held me back. In the middle of all this, Tom, my best friend, was a constant. We'd been through thick and thin together, and after everything with Jessica, he was there for me in ways I didn't even realize I needed. He'd call me up on weekends, drag me out of the house even if I wasn't in the mood. He pushed me to try new things, to meet new people, to stop wallowing in the past. I owe him for that. If it weren't for Tom, I probably would have just drowned myself in bitterness and regret. One night, after a few too many beers, Tom gave me the tough love talk I didn't want but definitely needed. We were sitting at some dive bar, watching a game, when he looked over at me and said, "Dude, you've got to stop living in the past. Jessica's gone. It's over. You've got to start thinking about what's next." I shrugged it off at first, but he wasn't letting it go. "I mean it, Jack. You're a good guy. You deserve better than to let that ruin the rest of your life. You've got to move on, man. Meet someone new. Live your life." And for the first time in a while, I actually thought about what he was saying. He was right. I couldn't keep letting Jessica's betrayal define me. Yeah, it happened. Yeah, it hurt. But I was still here. I was still standing. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start looking forward instead of back. Sophia and I started hanging out more after that. It wasn't anything serious at first, just friends, just talking. But I could feel the connection growing, little by little. She had this way of making me forget about everything else, even if it was just for a moment. I wasn't ready to jump into anything yet, but for the first time since the whole nightmare with Jessica, I felt like maybe I could. The fear was still there, though. Trusting someone again, that was a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. But with Sophia, I didn't feel rushed. She let me go at my own pace, never pushing, never expecting more than I was ready to give. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Building trust again is harder than I thought it would be after everything that happened with Jessica. It's like there's this invisible barrier I can't get past. But with Sophia, something feels different. She's patient, and I don't feel like I have to rush into anything. We started opening up more, talking about real stuff. Our pasts, our mistakes, the things that shaped us. It wasn't easy for me to go there, to dig into the parts of my life I'd been trying to bury. But with her, it didn't feel as overwhelming. Maybe because she never judged, never pushed me to be something I wasn't. One of those nights after work, just the two of us sitting in a quiet corner of a cafe. I hadn't planned on opening up, but it just came spilling out, the whole story. The betrayal, the court battle, the videos. Everything. I expected her to react, to maybe look at me differently after knowing the mess I'd been through. But she just listened, nodding every now and then, giving me space to get it all out. When I finally finished, all she said was, "That must have been hell for you." It caught me off guard. No pity, no lecture, just understanding. It was like a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying had lifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't defined by what Jessica had done to me. Maybe there was more to me than just the guy who got screwed over. Sophia and I kept growing closer after that. It wasn't some fairy tale romance. Not by a long shot. We took things slow, sometimes painfully slow. There were days when I'd retreat into myself, when the memories of Jessica would come flooding back like a tidal wave, pulling me under. Those moments when I'd remember the good times, the times when I thought everything was fine. It was like trying to scrub a stain that just wouldn't come off. No matter how much I tried to focus on the present, the past kept creeping in, reminding me of what I'd lost, of the person I used to be before it all went to hell. One night, lying in bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, going through those old memories like I had so many times before. It was always the same reel, Jessica's laugh, the way she used to look at me, the plans we made, and then the sharp turn, the betrayal, the lies, and the downfall. I hated that those memories still had power over me. I hated that she still occupied space in my head after everything. It made me wonder if I'd ever truly be free of it, if I could ever really move on without dragging that baggage into my future. Sophia noticed it too. She could tell when I'd start to pull away, when the ghosts of my past would take over. "You don't have to go through this alone," she told me one night after I'd been distant for a few days. "Whatever it is you're feeling, it's okay. Just don't shut me out." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't that I didn't want to let her in. I did. But letting her in meant confronting parts of myself I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The anger, the hurt, the fear that maybe I wasn't capable of being in a relationship anymore. That maybe, deep down, I was just as broken as Jessica had left me. But I didn't want to be that guy anymore. I didn't want to be stuck in the past, constantly replaying the worst parts of my life like some kind of punishment. I knew if I kept living like that, I'd never find any real peace. I'd just keep circling back to the same mistakes, the same doubts, the same pain. So I made a choice. I decided to face it, to deal with all the shit I'd been avoiding. I started seeing a therapist. Something I'd always thought was for other people, not me, but I needed it. I needed someone to help me untangle the mess in my head, to make sense of the chaos. And slowly, session by session, I started to understand what had been holding me back. It wasn't just the betrayal that had screwed me up. It was the way I'd lost trust in myself. I'd ignored the signs with Jessica, brushed off my own instincts because I didn't want to face the truth. I didn't want to believe that the person I loved could do something so awful. And now, with Sophia, I was terrified of making the same mistake. Terrified of trusting someone again, only to end up in the same place, broken and bitter. But through therapy, I started to see things differently. I realized that trusting someone doesn't mean ignoring the risks. It means understanding that, yeah, things might go wrong, but that doesn't mean they will. It's about taking that leap, even when you're scared. And more than that, it's about trusting myself. Trusting that I've learned from the past, that I won't ignore the signs again.